So the final part of our standardising video will be looking at the writing questions. Normally in unusual standardisation meeting we would start with the writing questions after we've done the shorter answer questions because of the large chunk of marks which are assigned to these questions. So a total of 40 marks out of 96. So there is quite a large chunk of marks assigned to these questions for 2 assessment objectives. So when you consider the percentage of marks that gives across paper 1 and paper 2, it's a significant amount of marks. Normally as a team what we'll do is we will look at a number of writing responses across the levels, but not necessarily 5 of question 8 and 5 of question 9, because we're using the same mark schemes to assess the questions, and some questions are more popular than others. Sometimes there's a balance, sometimes question 8 is more popular, sometimes question 9 is more popular. In this particular cohort of students who completed this for the purposes of this exercise, there were a very small number who completed question 9. The majority of them completed question 8. So we'll look at 5 question 8s and then briefly at one of the question 9 responses. So question 8 asks students to write a review of a shop, cafe or restaurant you've been to. The writing questions are always linked thematically to the reading texts in some general way, and there are some bullet points about what could be included. So what it is, what you went there for, you might say what you enjoyed or didn't enjoy, and whether you'd recommend it to others and why you would or why you wouldn't. And students did take a range of approaches. Some were complimentary about the place they went, some weren't so complimentary. So we'll have a look at some of the responses they've given. Writing is a skill that generally examiners in English feel very confident about rewarding. It's a skill that they've assessed time after time after time. It's just important to remember the assessment objectives for this particular examination that are being assessed. So AO5 is the ability to communicate clearly, effectively and imaginatively, thinking about form, purpose and audience. So there's that form, purpose, audience element, but also to organise information and ideas. That's not necessarily about layout, but it is about how you are connecting your ideas together, how you're ordering them, how you're developing them. So that's AO5. AO6 is about using a range of vocabulary, a range of sentence structures and a range of punctuation, but also the accuracy of those that you are using. So it's not just about SPAG in the sense of the old style, spelling, punctuation and grammar. It is also about the range of vocabulary that a student may be using. We'll have a look at script 1, and the first bullet point in the AO5 mark scheme is where examiners for writing will go first. It's that awareness of audience and purpose, and very, very helpful to us to read out the writing responses, just because it is quite helpful to hear how a particular student has created their piece. It also helps an examiner to pick up on spelling, punctuation or clunky syntax if there is any clunky syntax there. This student's chosen to write a review of a restaurant, and they are complimentary about it. Many branches. The one I had the pleasure of eating at was at London Bridge. Inside it was dim lit with elegant chandeliers and marble flooring, black classy seating. So there's some ideas about what the place is, what it's like. It's overlooking a river and grand buildings on the other side. Crimson roses and ivory draped over a chalky white balcony. was very sort of creating an atmospheric sort of approach. The peaceful atmosphere was topped off by a gentle, salty summer breeze over the beautiful location, to say the least. So they're trying to set the scene there and give us a feeling of what this restaurant is. And there is some direction in their answer. They've talked about the setting. They've then talked about their starter, which was French onion soup, their main course, duck, and cherry sauce with the side of roasted potatoes, carrots and cabbage. And they've definitely thought about how to engage their reader in the sense of a review. What was good about it? What did they enjoy about it? So delightful texture, goodness, crispy perfection, thick sweet cherry sauce, and it moves on to the dessert. There is some touches of attempts to engage the person reading. Lastly, dessert, which, let's be honest, is everyone's favourite part. I had creme brulee. So there is a sense of who is going to be reading this. They end their review with, well, I could have ate another, not a flaw in sight. Overall, it was amazing. I highly recommend. I'll definitely be going again. And they've given 5 stars. So if we consider that first bullet point, because students need to start their writing with, well, who am I writing for? What do I want my message to be? Am I advising them? Am I making a suggestion to them? Am I persuading them to do something? And in this case, it definitely creates a sense of what they think of this particular restaurant. If we look at level 2, do they show an awareness of audience and purpose? They definitely do that. There is a sense that there is a purpose. They've definitely explained the meal, the food, the ambience of the restaurant, and there's definitely a sense of audience there as well. So does it do a bit more than level 2? It does select material and rhetorical devices to suit the audience and purpose, so it does achieve that first part of that. And when you're applying this mark scheme, you're looking at the breakdown of bullets. So if in level 2 you've got shows an awareness of audience and purpose, you've met part of that bullet, but have you also got a straightforward use of tone, style and register? So it's 2 parts to think about there. So they've met that first part of the bullet point in level 3. And is there an appropriate use of tone, style and register? Yes, there is. It is appropriate. Does it develop and connect the appropriate information and ideas? Again, this is a very good discriminator in writing responses. Are the ideas just ordered and expressed? To a certain degree, they're ordered by the nature of the starter, the main and the dessert, but they are developed. There's a developed sense of what was good about it, what I liked about it, how I felt about it when I ate it, what I thought overall about the experience. So it does that. Are there structural and grammatical features which make the meaning clear? Because that's that final part of the level 3 achievement. These structural and grammatical features should also help to create the organisation. They help student to achieve that second part of that bullet point. Those kinds of things could be headings, they could be questions, they could be short sentences as examples. So for this response, they've met that second bullet point, the ideas are developed and connected. Not always in terms of the structural and grammatical features, because some of the sentence structure runs away with the candidate. Some of the sentences are too long and the meaning is lost slightly as you read the response. The first bullet point, you might say there are some elements of level 4 there, that there can be some effective use of tone, style and register, but it's not quite consistent enough. So on the basis of that, we felt that yes, it meets all of the bullet points of level 3 and achieves a mark of 14, and that reflects that it's bordering on being quite effective in its voice, but just not quite there with the overall structure and how they've created that meaning. For AO6, which is that range of vocabulary, range of sentence structure, range of punctuation, students are credited if they are ambitious in their vocabulary selection. If they've really tried, it may not always be correctly spelt, but they may have really tried to be ambitious and extensive. So that's credited in that bullet point which says, the first bullet point in AO6, which is about wide selective vocabulary in level 4, extensive vocabulary in level 5. So that's part of the bullet, but not all of the bullet. So they may have used an extensive vocabulary strategically, but there may be a range of correctly spelt words. So it may only be level 2 for the spelling. So there is a bit of a best fit approach needs to be taken here. Strategic use of vocabulary, using vocabulary strategically, what does that mean? Well, that's where the student is really thinking about the effect on their reader. How am I going to really make this reader feel the way that I want them to feel by using language? Students sometimes worry about the range of punctuation they're using. How do I show a range of punctuation? That could be ellipsis, it could be brackets, it could be colons, quotation marks. There could be a range of things that they, again, have pointed out in their question 3 responses that someone else has used, that they then think, I'm going to use that in my writing. Try and be ambitious in terms of sentence structure as well. Think about short sentences for effect. Think about questions, commands, how that might be used, and varying syntactical structures. For this response, we've already said that some of the sentence structures have an impact on the overall cohesion and organisation of this piece. It does have some selective vocabulary, it is there, and there is some attempt to be ambitious in vocabulary. Crystallised, for example, mouth-watering, creme brulee, but then you've got words like definitely, which are spelt incorrectly. It's one of those words students do struggle with at GCSE, but there are words like sensational, which is spelt correctly. So we would look and see, okay, have they used a wide selective vocabulary? And if they have, how well is it? Is it in terms of achieving spelling at different levels? And then we'd look at the punctuation and sentence structures. So there is some selective vocabulary, but spelling's often inaccurate, but we do credit them with the fact that they've tried to use some quite ambitious vocabulary there. Punctuation is an issue in this piece. There are frequent lapses and sentence control is not evident. Things like on the last page, contrast to the tender duck, full stop, just a sensational meal. It's not clear whether there's a capital letter there or not because of the spelling. It may be the student's attempting to use a short sentence for effect, but it's not hugely clear. So in this case, best fit would be in the middle of level 3, in the sense that they do use a varied vocabulary and spell words containing irregular patterns correctly in the main, and they use well, probably some controlled punctuation, more level 2. They do adapt sentence structure to contribute positively to purpose and effect, or try to. So a mark of 8 is given for AO6. So this candidate achieves 14 plus 8, which is 22 out of a total of 40 marks. There's not a great deal that you could encourage them to do more apart from just read through, check accuracy of spelling, think about your sentences, read through your sentences. When the piece is read out loud, that's when you really hear that lack of control in the syntax and organisation. Script 2 is quite a brief response. It is a review of an American grill in London, a Texas themed. I'm assuming they don't necessarily mean dive bar, as in it's not very good. Dive bar and restaurant. And there are some ideas there, although it's slightly brief in its coverage of ideas. So this restaurant serves a taste of the real America. It's got a loud atmosphere. It's got vintage sports memorabilia and 2 TVs showing American sports. Candidate had cheesesteaks and dessert. And so the ideas are there, but they're not necessarily hugely developed. The voice is effective and quite subtle in its approach. I mean, that last part where they've said authentic can be a very false term to apply when talking about restaurants, but American Grill is nothing but. You can see that they're trying to be quite subtle in their approach and their expression there, but there's just not enough of that sort of approach to credit more. As it is, the candidate does organise their material for effect, and the tone is effective and style is effective. Do they manage their information and ideas? They do. They select what they feel is relevant in terms of their overall review. And they do use structural features throughout. If you're searching for the real America, it's right here. Again, reading it out loud really helps you hear the sense of that effective use of tone and style and register. In order to move into level 5, we'd need a bit more sophistication and sustained sense of ideas being developed. As it is, the mark achieved is a mark of 19 at the top of level 4 for that response. For AO6, spelling and punctuation are accurate throughout, and they have attempted some wide vocabulary. I mean, there's palatable, authentic, there's delectable, memorabilia, mentioned brioche bun, and all of those words are spelt correctly, which is a positive. And we would therefore consider, if you look at the mark scheme, they've used a wide selective vocabulary. There aren't any spelling errors, so that's a positive to move up that level 4 mark scheme. Do they use a range of punctuation for clarity? There's not necessarily a range, although there's some colon use there, but they do manage sentence structures for deliberate effect. And because they've met not all of the bullet points in level 4 there, but most of them, we gave a mark of 11 for AO6. So this candidate achieves a mark of 19 plus 11, which is 30 out of 40. Moving on to script 3. This student takes a slightly different approach and reviews a shop, which is perfectly valid in the range of options in the question. And they've reviewed a sports shop, and they've almost taken a narrative approach. So I proceeded to enter the shop. I was in there for a lengthy amount of time looking for a new pair of shoes. I was very impressed as right away when I was having a look around, a member of staff approached me, politely asking if I needed any help. So they've taken a bit of a narrative approach. The ideas are expressed, so the staff are polite. They were impressed with the knowledge the member of staff had. I enjoyed shopping. They've repeated some of the ideas. Members of staff were knowledgeable, knew what they were talking about. So it's limited in its sense of development of ideas. They welcome you, again, repeating the same idea again. This store made you feel comfortable with the facility, which to me is a key thing to have. But they do have the sense that this is a review. Finally, I would definitely recommend this store to others with its knowledgeable, highly trained staff, high quality products, and you're well looked after while there. So some of the ideas are repeated over and over again. There's a little bit of repetition of the same idea. They're not hugely ordered particularly. Does it show an awareness of audience and purpose? It does for level 2. Is the tone straightforward? It is a bit straightforward. It's sort of, I did this, then I did this, then I went in, then I talked to this person, then this person said something. So it is more straightforward. And it expresses ideas but doesn't order them very clearly. Does use paragraphs, not really a range of structural and grammatical features. So within level 2, we've got meeting of that first part of the first bullet point and the second part of that first bullet point. The second bullet point, it expresses ideas but doesn't quite order them, and it does use paragraphs but not a range of structural and grammatical features. So it's towards the top of level 2, and we awarded it a mark of 8 for AO5, which is towards the top of level 2. In terms of the AO6 mark, again, we look over it and there's not a huge amount of ambitious vocabulary. They have said, furthermore, impressed by the knowledge that this member of staff had. But it is a fairly varied vocabulary. I proceeded to enter the shop is there, and spelling is generally accurate, although not 100%. Punctuation, use of apostrophes is slightly vague, but there is some variation in vocabulary. Recommend, facility, approach, knowledge. Syntax lacks control in places. Again, if you read it out loud, you hear that some of the sentences, such as, so I asked him which were the best quality, and then I was furthermore impressed by the knowledge that this member of staff held, not quite controlled. It makes it quite a basic sounding response. So we awarded a mark, recognising that this does meet the bullet points of level 2. It has a range of correctly spelt vocabulary, but it also is quite varied in its vocabulary. So we've awarded it just into level 3 for AO6 with a mark of 7. So that means that it does meet all of the bullet points of level 2, but because it has a varied vocabulary spelt correctly, we would just tip it into the next level. So quite a brief response for script 3. Script 4, I'd go back to that point of encouraging students to be tidy in their handwriting. It is clear to me what this candidate is trying to say, but in some places it's quite difficult to check that they are spelling particular words accurately because their writing's a little bit unclear. So they've written a review of a cafe known for its authentic Sicilian cuisine, an excellent spot for all things Mediterranean. The service was fast, the waiters impeccable, and the food was great quality for something so cheap in the heart of London. So straight away you do get a real feeling that this is a review. This is the kind of review that you might see in a free newspaper or you might pick up and read. And again, they've taken a fairly chronological approach. For a starter, I had a scrumptious arancini, which for those new to Sicilian food is a delicious blend of risotto rice and ham, succulently breaded with quality gluten-free breadcrumbs. Very specific description there. And what follows, the pesto and spaghetti, and the gelato as dessert. So it's very clearly structured and organised, and it is really selecting the material for effect and thinking about the audience response. It organises material for particular effect. Finally, the Beaumont presented a colossal array of homemade gelato with 4 types of chocolate and over a dozen fruit flavours. The biggest struggle I faced was deciding which of the wonderful flavours I'd go for. And there is that sense of quite subtle tone there. At last I decided on a scoop of vanilla and a scoop of strawberry, and I was not disappointed. It's hard to convey the richness and mouth-watering flavours I experienced in those first few bites, and I cannot recommend it enough. So you get a feel that this student is definitely meeting level 4. They have organised their material for effect, the tone is effective, but it does a little bit more than that. It has some subtle touches of phrasing and also some quite sophisticated use of tone. In summary, the restaurant is in an excellent location, although the view of dull, grey London did leave something to be desired. The food was simply stunning. So there is a real sense of they're trying to be quite sophisticated and sustained, and they sustain that tone throughout the piece. So we're looking at a response which is moving into level 5 here. The ideas and information are more managed than they are manipulated and complex, which is level 4, and the structural and grammatical features are used cohesively and deliberately across the text. We would give this a mark of 22 in level 5. It does meet that first bullet point completely, and it does try to utilise a range of structural features just to vary the review style. So there is elements of level 5, not complete level 5 achievement, but it is a very strong response. For AO6, there is some extensive use of vocabulary. We've got Mediterranean, arancini, impeccable, vibrant used and all spelt correctly. There are a couple of rare spelling errors. In some cases, it's difficult to tell whether they're an error or just the handwriting is a bit squiggly. But we do need to take that into consideration. Punctuation is accurate, and syntax is managed very well. Honestly, I haven't felt as refreshed in a very long time. There's definitely that sense of pausing just for effect to create a sense of how this person feels about this particular cafe. The total marks for writing we gave are 22 plus 13, so for AO6 just into level 5. That credits that extensive vocabulary and rare spelling errors, but just that there could be a little bit more in the way of that sentence structure and range of punctuation accurately used. So 23 plus 13, 35 out of 40 for script 4. Script 5, it's definitely a way of making sure that your examiners feel hungry at the end of any standardised exercise. This student's writing about a restaurant, which is a small, jazzy but calming, tasteful twist on your everyday chicken restaurant. in the seaside city town of Brighton, a new restaurant called Cornerstone, and they've really started out with an attempt to create a feeling for where the response is going. So it's small, jazzy, calming, deep in the lanes of Brighton, a new restaurant. Inside it's warm, with bright retro-themed walls, colours lighting up the pupils. Again, some slightly awkward expression. I think they mean the colours light up your eyes and engage you with that. So there is quite an effective tone here. The handsome presented menu with a wide range of choice overwhelmed by chicken. Some of the ideas are not expressed particularly clearly, but they are really trying to be effective in their voice that they're using. Again, they talk in chronological order. My starter of halloumi, and again, the expression doesn't quite achieve the effect that they intend. The texture of soft but yet this rubbery cheese, not entirely convincing in the way of how effective that is, because they are saying that it's very good, and they try to say bring joy to my taste buds. The expression lets that down a little bit. The waiters, they mention the waiters dressed in buzzing colours of black and yellow, quite a nice sort of use of phrasing to reflect the buzzing of a bee, because they were dressed in black and yellow. It's quite clever. And how to perfectly present each order and time when each meal was arriving. There's quite a bit of detail in the ideas that are being presented here. A waiter came and gave me a fresh set of stainless steel silver cutlery before the main, and then talks about how the main was smack bang perfect. Again, a lot of detail in the description of the main course, and then the dessert, raspberry sorbet with a single raspberry topped on the top. And then the ending, it clearly sums up. The atmosphere was good, the evening felt very special, and the value for money that the candidate's talking about there. They're aware of their audience, definitely check it out without a doubt, and are very clearly attempting to create a piece which has a sense of audience and purpose. So it's a longer and more detailed response than some of the responses that we've seen. It does meet level 3. If we just looked at level 3, it does select its material to suit the audience and purpose, and the use of tone, style and register is appropriate. It's definitely done that. It does develop and connect the information and ideas, and the structural and grammatical features and the paragraphing here does make the meaning clear overall. Does it move into level 4? Well, it does really try to organise the material for particular effect and try to create an effective use of tone, style and register. And for that reason, we just moved it into level 4 with the mark of 16. Some of the phrasing impacts on the mark moving higher, but it does meet that first bullet point. Is it effective in its use of tone? It really, really tries to be. Not consistently, which is why it doesn't go very, very high into level 4, but it does achieve a mark of 16. From the perspective of AO6, this is where the answer doesn't do as well. The candidate does try to use a varied vocabulary, but the spelling is not always accurate. I mean, you've got overwhelmed, which is accurate, you've got halloumi, which is accurate, but then sometimes there are some errors like chili sauce with a Y, and there are some spelling errors which are just impacting on the quality of the response. Punctuation is generally accurate, but it's not hugely varied. And the sentence structure, they do try to use sentence structure for effect. This £3.10 halloumi starter was to die for, but it's not varied as it could be. In order to reflect those errors, but also the fact that there is quality in the AO5, we would give that a mark of 8, which is in the middle of level 3. So although it's credited into level 4 for AO5, it doesn't quite achieve that for AO6 and is the middle of level 3. So 16 plus 8 for script 5. The final script we'll look at is a response to question 9. It's important to say that if students do confuse what they're supposed to be doing with an answer, so for example, if they'd written a review of something different to a shop, cafe or restaurant, we would try and credit what we could within the realms of the question and apply the mark scheme as best we can. For a couple of the students in this cohort, they had misunderstood this particular question, which is for the students to write a section for a booklet giving advice to people who want to support their local community. And students were asked to talk about what kind of help communities need, how they can get involved in helping the community, and what impact the help could give. This particular response is a fairly brief response, although the candidate's handwriting is very small, as you can see. And it does, if we look at it, it does attempt to express some ideas. So for communities to work, they need participants. Communities are there to bring people together. Communities need to come up with ways to involve people. This is why we have things like voting to gather opinions and recommendations on how to improve. So there are some ideas expressed, although not always completely relevant to the question. To get people involved, they could come up with various workshops such as fundraising or donating. So they are really trying to engage in expressing and ordering their ideas, even though they haven't quite got the sense of audience and purpose right. That way people will be intrigued, but to really attract them, the workshops should be fun. This can be achieved by making fun fair activities for children and families. So again, it's not slightly focused enough on the sense of audience and purpose that it would need to be to meet the demands of the question, but they have really tried to express some ideas, to order them, and to show some awareness of the audience and the purpose. The people should know that their help will have a great impact. This section moves away from understanding the audience a little bit. It's a bit more confused about who the audience is. The people should know. If you're writing to people, then you wouldn't say the people should know necessarily. It takes effort, hard work, togetherness and participation to keep the community going. And the first thing to put out there is that they know it. So some elements of the response are where if you were marking this as a teacher, you'd put a question mark next to that. It's not really clear what you mean by that idea. So despite the confusion about the question, the student does show an awareness of audience and purpose. The tone is a little bit more than straightforward. I mean, there is some appropriate use of tone. It takes effort, hard work, togetherness and participation to keep the community going is an appropriate phrase. But it's not doing much more than that. It is expressing ideas and they are in some order and paragraphs are used. So we have met the bullet points of level 2. And this answer just moves into level 3, only just. It is very much a borderline response, but it does move into level 3 because the tone is mostly appropriate for the task that we're asking. The sense of audience and purpose needs to be clearer to move it any higher than that. This candidate, again, doesn't have a particularly good control of sentence structure, and some of the expression is unclear. But in terms of spelling, there's some varied vocabulary, recommendations, fundraising, donating is used, economy, but there's some evidence that there are some words missing which impact on the syntax, and a lack of varied punctuation and syntax. It lacks a sort of ending to a degree, but we did feel that it did enough to just move into level 3 for AO6 with a mark of 7, in the sense that there was varied vocabulary used, and in some cases that varied vocabulary is spelt correctly. So hopefully that has taken you through our standardisation scripts. You will be able to access the full scripts and look back at them and have a look at the standard set to use those with your students' own answers. So when your students complete these answers, you can say, is it better? Is it worse? Is it the same but for different reasons to this particular script that we looked at on the video? And that's what we always encourage people to do when they're marking in an exam series, to go back to that set of scripts and say, how does it compare? How does this question 3 compare? Some advice I would give you when you are marking your own student scripts is, although it's tempting as a teacher to mark all of student 1's answer and then go to student 2 and then go to student 3, what I would do is, in order to keep that standard in your mind, is to mark the question 1's, mark the question 2's, 4's and 5's. So follow the process we've done today. Mark all of the question 3's together, mark all of the question 6's together. The reason being that you really then get a feel for the standard, and that standard is in your mind. That's what we say to examiners. They don't mark all of their question 6's in one sitting, but we will say, please do try and dip into each question every time you go in to mark something, just to remind yourself of the standard. So when you go to mark your students' responses, you'll need your mark scheme, extract booklet, question paper, you'll need your standardisation scripts and marks, and you'll start to work through the process of comparing your students' answers with the ones that we've looked at today. I hope you found the video useful, and hopefully your students will all go on and do really well when they take their examinations in the future. Thank you very much.
So that concludes working through the materials for paper 1 and paper 2. I do hope that you have found everything useful, and do look back at those materials before you do your mocks marking, and use the answers as benchmarks to ensure that the standards that you apply are consistent. There are many materials on the Edexcel website that I think you would find helpful, so please dip in and see what else you might be able to use to ensure that your students do get the results that they deserve. And one last little reminder, please remember to input your students' marks on Results Plus. This really does give you the chance to analyse how your students have done, and if the statistics team at Edexcel have sufficient of those marks from centres around the country, they will be able to look much more closely at the statistics for the cohort as a whole. So happy marking.